The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never seen a species quite as pathetic as humanity. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the Great Hall of the Council Station, surrounded by beings from 800 different worlds, and she kept her face calm as the laughter washed over her like a wave of poison. The Velthari High Admiral, a tall crystalline being named Cathsarian, was giving a speech about military power, and he had chosen humanity as his example of weakness. "Look at the humans," he said, his voice ringing through the chamber like breaking glass. "They have been among us for 60 years now, and what have they achieved?" He waved one of his 4 arms toward Elena with a gesture of pure contempt. "Their ships still run on primitive fusion engines. Their weapons are nothing but chunks of metal thrown at high speeds. A single Velthari cruiser could destroy their entire fleet before breakfast." The chamber erupted in laughter, and Elena simply smiled and nodded as if she agreed with every word. She had been doing this for 20 years now, smiling and nodding while aliens treated her people like insects. And she had become very good at hiding her true feelings, what none of them knew, what none of them could possibly suspect, was that every insult brought humanity one step closer to the day of revelation, deep beneath the surface of Mars, in tunnels that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The greatest secret in human history was taking shape. Project Erebus had begun 40 years ago, when a young physicist named Dr. Sarah Chun had made a discovery that changed everything. She had found a way to detect dark matter, the invisible substance that made up most of the universe, and more importantly, she had found a way to harvest it. The Council species had been studying dark matter for thousands of years without success, so they had long ago decided that it was impossible to use. And they had stopped trying. Humanity had not stopped trying in those hidden tunnels on Mars. Human engineers had built machines that could pull dark matter from the void of space and concentrate it into forms that could be controlled. They had learned to shape gravity itself, to fold space like paper, to create weapons that made antimatter bombs look like children's toys. And they had built ships, massive vessels that existed partly in normal space and partly in the dark matter realm that lay beneath reality like a shadow beneath the skin. Erebus-class warships were humanity's true achievement, and there were now 144 of them hiding in the darkness between stars, waiting for the day when they would be needed. Elena thought about those ships as she stood in the council chamber, enduring another round of mockery from species who thought they were her betters. She thought about the power that humanity held in secret, power that could crush every fleet in the galaxy if it was unleashed, and she felt a calm satisfaction beneath her polite smile. The Velthari thought they were the masters of the universe because they had antimatter weapons and faster-than-light drives, but they had no idea what true power looked like. They would learn someday, but not today. As for watching and waiting and gathering information, a Krethix diplomat scuttled past her, its insect-like body clicking against the floor, and it did not even acknowledge her presence. The Krethix had been raiding human colonies for decades, killing thousands of innocent people, and the Council had done nothing to stop them because humanity was too unimportant to protect. Elena had filed 17 formal complaints about the Krethix attacks, and every single one had been ignored or dismissed. The Council does not involve itself in minor territorial disputes, the High Arbiter had told her, as if the deaths of human children were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She had wanted to scream at him, to tell him that humanity would remember this cruelty when the time came, but she had simply nodded and thanked him for his consideration. That was the hardest part of her job, the constant pretending, the endless performance of weakness. Every night she returned to her quarters and wrote encrypted reports to Earth, detailing everything she had learned about council politics and military deployments. They suspect nothing, she wrote again and again. Project Erebus remains undetected. The Council had inspectors who visited, Earth every few years to assess humanity's technological development. And each time they came, they found exactly what they expected to find. They saw fusion reactors and chemical rockets and electromagnetic weapons. All the primitive technology of a species that had barely crawled out of its home system. They did not see the dark matter, research facilities hidden beneath the ice of Europa, or the shipyards buried in the asteroid belt, or the training academies where human officers learned to command weapons that could crack. Planets in half humanity had become very good at hiding, at showing the galaxy exactly what it wanted to see while keeping its true nature secret. Elena sometimes wondered if the deception was even necessary anymore. If humanity should simply reveal its power and demand the respect it deserved. But the military commanders back on Earth had been clear about the strategy. We wait. Admiral Helena Jang had told her in their last secure communication. We wait until they give us a reason that the whole galaxy will understand. And then we show them what we really are. Elena had agreed, even though the waiting was hard. Even though every insult and every ignored complaint made her want to tear away. The mask of weakness and show these arrogant aliens the truth. So she stood in the council chamber and smiled as Kethsarian finished his speech about human inferiority. She applauded politely when the other delegates applauded, and she pretended not to notice when a group of Velthri officers pointed at her and laughed. 60 years, she thought to herself. 60 years of patience and preparation. And soon it will all be worth it. She did not know that the moment of revelation was closer than she thought. That events were already in motion that would force humanity to show its hand on a distant colony world called New Helsinki. 2 million humans were going about their daily lives, unaware that a Krethix attack fleet was heading toward them at faster than light speeds. The massacre that was coming would change everything, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The news reached Earth like a knife through the heart of every human being alive. New Helsinki was gone, burned to ashes by the Krethix swarm, and 2,300,000 people had died in a single terrible night. The attack had come without warning. A fleet of Krethix bioships descending from the sky like a plague of locusts. And the colony's defenses had been overwhelmed, and minutes men and women and children had run through the streets, screaming for help that never came, while Krethix warriors hunted them down with acid sprayers and blade arms. Last transmission from the colony showed a young mother holding her infant daughter, begging anyone who could hear her to send help. And then the signal had cut to static when human rescue ships finally arrived 3 days later. They found nothing but smoking ruins and the scattered bones of the dead ambassador. Elena Vasquez stood before the Galactic Council with tears in her eyes, holding a data crystal that contained the names of every person who had died. I am here to formally request military intervention against the Krethix swarm, she said, her voice steady despite her grief. They have committed genocide against a human colony, and justice demands a response. The High Arbiter, a serpentine being named Yelmo Khan, barely looked up from his data slate as she spoke. His scales were a deep purple color, and his eyes were cold and indifferent. The eyes of someone who had heard countless such requests and denied them all. The Council does not expend resources defending Grade 7 species from the consequences of their own territorial overreach, he said, as if he was reading from a script he had used 1,000 times before. Elena felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce, but she kept her voice calm. Territorial overreach? New Helsinki was a legally registered colony in human space. The Krethix attacked sovereign human territory without provocation. Yamokin finally looked at her, and there was something like amusement in his alien eyes. The Krethix claim that the system belonged to them before your species even developed space travel, and the Council has no interest in adjudicating ancient territorial disputes. Ancient? We established that colony 80 years ago. As I said, The High Arbiter replied with a dismissive wave. Ancient by Council standards, before Elena could respond. High Admiral Kefsarian rose from his seat in the Valkyrie section of the chamber. His crystalline body caught the light as he moved, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the walls. And his forearms were folded in a gesture of authority. "If I may address the council," he said. And Yelmo Khan nodded for him to continue. "The Valkyrie Dominion has been watching humanity's situation with great concern, and we believe we have a solution that will benefit everyone." Elena felt a cold dread forming in her stomach as Kefsarian turned to face her with a predator smile. "Humanity is clearly unable to defend itself against even minor threats like the Krethiks," he said. "This is not an insult, simply a statement of fact based on your technological limitations." He began walking toward her, his footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. "The Dominion is prepared to offer humanity protectorate status under our banner, which means we would assume responsibility for your defense and your governance." "Our governance?" Elena asked, though she already knew what was coming. "Your planetary governments would be dissolved and replaced by Valkyrie administrators, and your population would be redistributed across Dominion space to serve in whatever capacity we see fit." He stopped directly in front of her, towering over her small human form. "In simple terms, Ambassador, your people would become workers and servants in our empire, but in exchange, you would have our protection from threats like the Krethiks." The chamber was completely silent as every delegate waited for Elena's response. She could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching her, waiting to see the primitive human accept her species' inevitable fate. "And if we refuse?" she asked quietly. Catharine's smile widened, showing rows of crystalline teeth that sparkled like diamonds. "Then you will be subjugated by force. Your military assets will be destroyed, and your people will serve the Dominion anyway, but under much less pleasant terms." He leaned down until his face was only inches from hers. "You have 30 rotations to comply with this generous offer, and I strongly suggest you do not waste time hoping for alternatives." His voice dropped to a whisper that only she could hear. "Your fusion ships cannot outrun our antimatter drives. Your kinetic weapons cannot pierce our shields, and your species has no allies who would risk themselves on your behalf." He straightened up and addressed the chamber once more. "This is not a negotiation. It is mercy, and humanity should be grateful that the Dominion is willing to take responsibility for such a backward species." Elena stood very still as the council delegates murmured their approval of the Valkyrie proposal. She thought about New Helsinki, about the mother and her baby, about 2 million people who had died because the galaxy considered humanity worthless. She thought about the secret ships hiding in the darkness, about the power that waited to be unleashed, about 40 years of patience and preparation, and for the first time in 20 years, she stopped smiling. 30 days, she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a Bladakethsarian paused, surprised by the steel in her tone. 30 days, Elena repeated, looking up at him with eyes that held no fear. Only a cold and terrible promise. That should be sufficient. She turned and walked out of the chamber without another word, leaving confused silence in her wake. As soon as she reached her quarters, she activated the most secure communication channel that human technology could create, a quantum-encrypted link that connected directly to Earth's military command admiral. Helena Jiang's face appeared on the screen, her expression calm and expectant. "I assume the council rejected our request," she said. "They did more than that," Elena replied. "The Valkyrie have given us an ultimatum, surrender or be conquered." Jiang nodded slowly, and something like satisfaction flickered across her face. "Then the time has finally come. Are we ready?" "We have been ready for 20 years, Ambassador. And the Erebus fleet is already moving into position." Elena felt the weight of 60 years of humiliation lifting from her shoulders. When the Valkyrie arrive, Make sure they understand what they are facing. Jang smiled. A smile that promised fire and darkness and the judgment of a species that had been pushed too far. Oh, they will understand, Ambassador. I will make absolutely certain of that. 29 days later, the Valkyrie subjugation fleet entered human space. Expecting to find a helpless prey waiting to surrender, they found something else entirely. High Admiral Kethsarian stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the stars of human space slide past on the viewscreen. 300 antimatter dreadnoughts followed behind him. The greatest fleet the Valkyrie had assembled in 1,000 years. And he felt nothing but contempt for the enemy they were about to crush. How long until we reach Earth? He asked his navigation officer. 6 hours, High Admiral. And we have detected no significant human military presence between here and their homeworld. Kethsarian made a sound of disgust deep in his crystalline throat. Of course, there is no military presence, because the humans have nothing that could even slow us down. He had expected at least some token resistance. Perhaps a few dozen fusion-powered ships making a brave but futile stand. But the humans seem to have already accepted their fate. Open a channel to the human government, he commanded. I want to receive their surrender before we even reach their pathetic little planet. The communications officer worked at her console for a moment, then looked up with confusion on her face. High Admiral, there is no response from Earth, and I am detecting some kind of interference in our long-range sensors. Interference? What kind of interference? I am not certain. The readings do not match any known phenomenon. Kethsarian frowned. His crystalline brow ridges drawing together. Put it on the main screen. The view screen flickered and changed, showing a tactical display of the space around the Valkyrie fleet. At first, everything looked normal. Just the emptiness of space dotted with distant stars. But then he noticed something strange. There were patches of darkness that seemed deeper than the surrounding void. Areas where even starlight seemed to disappear. What am I looking at? He demanded before anyone could answer. Alarms began screaming across the bridge. High Admiral. The sensor officer shouted, his voice cracking with fear. I am detecting massive gravitational anomalies forming around the fleet. Gravitational anomalies? That is impossible. There are no large masses anywhere near our position. The readings are off every scale we have. It is as if something is tearing holes in space itself. Kethsarian watched in disbelief as the patches of darkness on the view screen began to grow and spread, swallowing the light of stars like hungry mouths, and then the darkness opened. And something came through. The first ship emerged from the void like a nightmare taking physical form. A massive vessel that seemed to be made of shadow and emptiness rather than metal and alloy. It was enormous, larger than any spacecraft Kethsarian had ever seen, and it moved through space without any visible engines or propulsion systems. Light bent around its hull in ways that hurt to look at, and sensors could not seem to focus on it, returning readings that made no sense at all. What in the name of the ancestors is that thing? Someone whispered more rifts were opening now. More ships emerging from the darkness. 12 in total, surrounding the Valkyrie fleet like wolves circling a wounded animal. Kethsarian's tactical officer was staring at his console with wide, terrified eyes. High Admiral, I cannot get a weapons lock on those vessels. Every time I try to target them, the sensors say they are not there. That is ridiculous. We can see them with our own eyes. I know, but the sensors insist that those ships do not exist. A voice crackled through the communication system. Clear and calm and utterly human. Valkyrie fleet. This is Admiral Helayan Jang of the Earth Defense Force, and you have entered sovereign human space with hostile intent. Kethsarian felt his confidence returning as he recognized the voice of a mere human. Whatever these strange ships were, they were still being commanded by primitives who did not understand real warfare. "Admiral Jang," he replied with a mocking laugh. "I do not know where you found those interesting vessels, but 12 ships cannot defeat 300 Valkyrie dreadnoughts. No matter how impressive they look, you will power down your weapons and submit to boarding." Jang continued as if he had not spoken. "Or you will be annihilated." Annihilated? By humans? The very idea is absurd. "You have 60 seconds to comply." Kefsarian ended the communication with a snarl and turned to his weapons officer. "Target the closest enemy vessel and fire everything we have. Show these primitives what real military power looks like." The Eternal Dominion shuddered as its antimatter cannons unleashed a barrage that would have vaporized a small moon. 300 warheads streaked across space toward the nearest human ship, trailing fire and fury, enough destructive power to crack a planet in half. The warheads reached the human vessel and simply vanished. There was no explosion, no impact, no sign that the weapons had ever existed. They touched the dark hull and disappeared, swallowed by something that sensors could not detect or explain. "That is impossible." Kefsarian screamed. "Fire again. All ships, concentrate fire on the nearest enemy." The entire Valkyrie fleet opened up at once, filling space with antimatter death. Enough firepower to sterilize a solar system. Every single shot vanished into the darkness surrounding the human vessels, absorbed without effect, like stones dropped into a bottomless ocean. "What are those things?" The tactical officer whimpered. "What are we fighting?" Admiral Jang's voice returned to the communication channel, and this time there was ice in every word. "We gave you a chance to surrender, and you chose to attack instead." The human ships began to glow. But it was not the glow of engines or weapons charging. It was the glow of space itself twisting, reality bending, gravity becoming a weapon in ways that violated every law of physics Kefsarian had ever learned. "Now you will learn what happens when you threaten humanity." The first shot from the human fleet was not light or energy or matter. It was something else entirely. A pulse of pure gravitational force that crossed the distance between ships, faster than thought itself. The Valkyrie dreadnought Righteous Fury was there one moment and gone the next, crushed into a sphere the size of a small ball by gravitational forces that should not exist outside a black hole. Kefsarian watched 300 years of shipbuilding expertise compressed into nothing in less than a heartbeat, and then the human ships fired again. The battle was not a battle at all. It was a massacre, and Kefsarian could do nothing but watch as his magnificent fleet was torn apart. The human weapons did not behave like any technology he had ever seen or studied or imagined. Shot created a tiny black hole that lasted only a fraction of a second. But that fraction was enough to crush a starship into a ball of compressed matter smaller than a Fist 47. Valkyrie dreadnoughts died in the first salvo, simply ceasing to exist as gravitational forces beyond comprehension tore them apart. "All ships, retreat." Kefsarian screamed into the communication system. "Fall back to hyperspace immediately." His navigation officer turned to him with terror on her face. "We cannot, High Admiral. Something is blocking our hyperspace drives. We are trapped." The human vessels were moving now, sliding through space without any visible propulsion, appearing next to fleeing Valkyrie ships like shadows, materializing from nothing. They did not travel through space the way normal ships did. They simply folded it, disappearing from one location and appearing in another faster than sensors could. Track 60 more dreadnoughts vanished in the second salvo, their antimatter cores imploding as they were crushed by impossible gravity. Kefsarian watched the Sword of Dominion, a ship that had served the Empire for 500 years, crumple like paper as a gravitational pulse hit it directly in the engine section. "This cannot be happening," he whispered. "We are the Valkyrie. We rule the stars. We cannot be defeated by primitives." But the evidence was all around him. Hundreds of escape pods launching from dying ships. Thousands of Velthari warriors screaming their final breaths into the void, a third salvo. And 90 more dreadnoughts ceased to exist. The human ships moved among the Velthari fleet like predators in a herd of helpless prey, choosing targets at will, destroying them with casual efficiency. There was no urgency in their movements, no desperation. Only the calm precision of a species that knew it had already won. High Admiral, his communications officer said in a voice that trembled with shock. Admiral Jiang is hailing us again. Put her through. The human admiral's face appeared on the view screen, and Kathsarian was stunned to see that she looked almost bored. Your fleet is destroyed, she said simply. You have lost 273 ships in the last 8 minutes. And we have not suffered a single casualty. Kathsarian looked at his tactical display and saw that she was telling the truth. Only 27 Velthari dreadnoughts remained operational, and several of those were badly damaged. What do you want? He asked, his voice hollow with defeat. I want you to survive. Jiang replied, I want you to go back to the Galactic Council and tell them what you saw here today. You are letting us live? I am letting you escape so that you can deliver a message. She leaned forward, her eyes hard and cold. Humanity could have destroyed your entire fleet in minutes. And we could have done it years ago if we had chosen to reveal ourselves. Why did you hide? Because we wanted peace, not conquest. But your council refused to give us justice. And your dominion tried to enslave us. Jiang's expression did not change, but her voice grew even colder. Tell your council that humanity has 144 ships like the ones you saw today, with more being built every month. 144. Kathsarian felt his legs grow weak beneath him. If 12 of these dark matter vessels could destroy 300 dreadnoughts in minutes, what could 144 do? They could burn the entire galaxy. That is what they could do. Tell them that humanity demands a seat on the High Council as equal members. Jiang continued. Tell them that we demand justice for our colony and reparations from the Krethik swarm. And if they refuse, then we will discuss alternative arrangements. The communication ended, and Kathsarian stood in silence as his remaining ships limped away from the battlefield. When he arrived at the council station 3 days later, he found the delegates already gathered, eager to hear news of humanity's subjugation. Instead, he showed them the sensor recordings from the battle. The chamber exploded into chaos as 800 species watched the mighty Velthari fleet crushed like insects. Delegates screamed and shouted and demanded explanations. But Kathsarian had no answers to give them. This is a trick. The Krethik's High Broodmother shrieked. The humans cannot possess such technology. I saw it with my own eyes, Kathsarian replied, his voice dead and empty. I felt my ships dying around me. I watched 300 years of military superiority turn to nothing in minutes. Ambassador Elena Vasquez rose from her seat, and for the first time since she had joined the council, every eye in the chamber turned to her with something other than contempt. The Velthari came to enslave my people, she said, her voice ringing clear and strong. They came with threats and ultimatums and dreams of conquest. She walked to the center of the chamber, standing where Kathsarian had mocked her only weeks before. We could have revealed ourselves at any time. We could have conquered the galaxy when your ancestors were still learning to make fire. But we chose peace instead. The delegates stared at her in stunned silence. We asked for justice when the Krethiks murdered our people. And you laughed at us. We asked for protection under council law. And you offered us slavery. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of every species representative in the chamber. That ends now. Humanity will have a seat on the High Council as equal members. The Krethiks will pay reparations for their crimes. And no species will ever threaten human sovereignty again. The Velthari delegate rose to speak, but Vasquez cut him off with a raised hand. I am not finished. Her voice dropped to a whisper. that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. Our ships are watching this station right now, cloaked in darkness, waiting to see how you respond to our demands. She smiled. And it was not the polite smile she had worn for 20 years. Choose wisely. The vote was unanimous, and humanity took its place among the great powers of the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Sol, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Velthari Dominion, once the mightiest empire in known space, had shattered into 12 separate nations, each one blaming the others for the catastrophic defeat that had broken their power forever. Kethsarian had been stripped of his rank and exiled to a frozen, Mayan colony on the edge of civilized space. A fallen hero who had led his people into a war they could not win, the Krethic swarm had sent envoy after envoy to Earth, begging for forgiveness, offering treasure and territory and anything else that might satisfy the humans. They had wronged Admiral Jang, had received their ambassadors with cold courtesy, and handed them a simple document. "These are our terms," she said. "You will pay reparations to the families of everyone who died on New Helsinki. You will withdraw from all systems within 50 light years of human space. And you will never attack another human colony again." The Krethic's High Brood Mother had looked at the demands and then at the dark matter warship hovering silently outside her window. "We accept," she said. "We accept everything." Humanity had not claimed a single system that did not already belong to them, had not demanded tribute or slaves or any of the things that conquering species usually demanded, and they had proposed something unprecedented in galactic history. Ambassador Vasquez, now High Counselor Vasquez, stood before the reformed Galactic Assembly and presented the Soul Accords. For 12,000 years, the strong have preyed upon the weak in this galaxy, she said. Species with advanced technology have conquered and enslaved those who could not defend themselves, and the Council has done nothing to stop it. She activated a holographic display that showed the entire Orion Arm, with humanity's territory marked in blue. That changes today. The Soul Accords established a new framework for galactic civilization, one based on protection rather than predation. Every species, no matter how primitive, would have the right to develop in peace without fear of conquest or enslavement. Raid agreements would be fair and transparent, enforced by neutral arbitrators rather than military threats, and humanity would serve as the guarantor of this new order. The Guardians of the Void, peacekeepers who would intervene against aggression wherever it occurred. "You want to be the galaxy's police force?" A Thalaxian delegate asked with obvious skepticism. "We want to be the galaxy's conscience," Vasquez replied. "We have the power to rule the stars by force, but we choose to protect instead of conquer." She looked around the chamber at faces that showed every possible emotion. Fear and hope and suspicion and wonder. For 60 years, you treated humanity as worthless, as prey, as a joke not worth taking seriously. Her voice hardened with the memory of decades of humiliation. "You were wrong about us, and now we have the chance to show you what we really are." She gestured to the window, where an Erebus-class warship was visible in the distance, its dark hull barely distinguishable against the void of space. That ship out there could destroy this station and everyone in it in seconds. But it will not, because destruction is not why we built it. We built our ships to defend ourselves and to protect others, to make sure that what happened on New Helsinki never happens to anyone else, human or otherwise. The vote on the Soul Accords was not unanimous this time. Several species still resented humanity's sudden rise to power, but the majority approved the new framework by a wide margin in the months that followed. The galaxy began to transform. An Erebus squadron arrived at the Korvax homeworld, just in time to stop an invasion fleet from the neighboring Zelthix Empire, appearing from nowhere and announcing that the attack would not be permitted the Zelthic's commanders looked at the dark matter warships and remembered what had happened to the Veltharathi, withdrew without firing a single shot on the far side of the Orion Arm. A species called the Menathi had been enslaved by the Varakian collective for 300 years, bred as servants and forbidden from developing technology of their own. A single human ambassador arrived at the Varakian capital with a message from Admiral Jang: "Free the Menathi within 30 days, or we will free them ourselves." The Menathi were freed within 20 throughout the galaxy. Species that had been oppressed for centuries began to look toward humanity with something that had not existed before. Hope. "The humans are coming," became a phrase whispered in slave quarters and prison camps. A promise that someone out there cared about their suffering. Not every problem could be solved by dark matter warships, of course. And humanity made mistakes as they learned to navigate their new role as galactic peacekeepers. Some conflicts were too complicated for simple intervention. Some grievances too old and deep to be resolved by outside forces. But humanity tried, which was more than the old council had ever done. Elena Vasquez, who had spent 20 years smiling at insults and pretending to be weak, now sat in the highest seat of the reformed Galactic Assembly. She thought about the young physicist Dr. Sarah Chun, who had discovered dark matter manipulation 40 years ago and changed the destiny of her species. She thought about Admiral Jang, who had spent decades preparing for a war she hoped would never come. She thought about the mother on New Helsinki, holding her baby daughter in those final moments. And she made a silent promise that such tragedies would never be ignored again. "Humanity does not conquer because we can," she said in her final address to the Assembly. Her words broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. We protect because we choose to. And that choice, that restraint, is what makes us worthy of the power we hold. She paused, looking out at the representatives of 1,000 species who now looked at humanity with respect instead of contempt. Remember this lesson well, because the darkness between stars is watching, and it answers to us now. In the void beyond the station, invisible to sensors and silent as death, an Erebus-class warship maintained its eternal vigil. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or rulers, but as guardians of a galaxy that had never known such protectors before. And in the darkness that had once been used to mock them, they had found the power to change everything. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again.